Okay, we're starting. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Bell Museum's 4th annual Statewide Star Party. My name is Nia Navarro, and I am your host this evening. I'm so excited that you're joining us for our virtual kickoff. Tonight's program marks the start of the Statewide Star Party, Minnesota's celebration of our shared love for astronomy. As your host, I want to take a moment to orient you to our virtual space and invite you to interact with us using the Q&A feature in Zoom to send in your questions and comments throughout the evening. Our team is behind the scenes monitoring and answering any questions that we can't get to. For your information, this event is recorded and live captioned. If you find those captions distracting or not useful, you can hide them by clicking on the Live CC button on your screen. So, to kick us off, I want to invite Holly, our interim executive director here at the Bell, to share a few remarks about this year's theme, Astronomy for All. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Nia, and welcome everyone. We're so excited that you're here joining us online this evening. As Nia mentioned, the theme of this year's Statewide Star Party is Astronomy for All. And through programs and events over the course of this weekend, starting here online tonight and then in person all across Minnesota through Saturday evening, we want to empower the astronomer within all of us. We firmly believe that there are points of entry for all ages and abilities and perspectives to share in the joys and wonders of the night sky. And while our collective gaze will be upon the skies, I want to start by grounding us here on Earth, where Indigenous peoples have been observing, studying, and sharing stories about the stars for tens of thousands of years. We at the Bell Museum tonight are on Dakota land, traditional land reserved in treaties and still important to the Dakota people today. I would also like to acknowledge the Ojibwe people, traditional keepers of lands to our north. Dakota and Ojibwe knowledge systems are crucial ways of knowing this place now called Minnesota. And at the Bell Museum, we value the people and communities that protect Indigenous knowledge systems, and we seek ways to support them in their work. We are committed to better understanding our own institutional history and our place in Indigenous dispossession and erasure, and to finding ways to redress the wrongs of both past and present. We seek to build respectful, equitable relationships with Indigenous peoples. For instance, in our programming, we support Indigenous peoples by providing a platform for them to communicate cultural, ecological, and astronomical knowledge on their own terms, as you will hear tonight, right here tonight. We also extend free admission to our museum galleries and planetarium to all Indigenous peoples in honor of the Dakota people. We invite you to learn more about this policy and the Bell's commitment to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion on our website. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. And now I would like to introduce a dear coworker, brilliant astronomer, and tonight's moderator, Aanakwadikwe, to join the stage and introduce herself and our panelists. Welcome.
Bonjour. Hi, everybody. Ninsa Gaagige Aanakwadikwe Indigu. And I am tonight's moderator.
A little bit about Aanakwadikwe. She is an Ojibwe immersion and science educator. She teaches at the Misabekong Ojibwe Immersion School in Duluth, Minnesota, and she teaches in full Ojibwe immersion and developing science and astronomy curriculum in Ojibwe language. She is also the Native American specialist for the Bell Museum and works to integrate her astronomy research and knowledge into education and describing concepts from the Ojibwe language and perspective. I'm so excited that you're moderating tonight's conversation, Aanakwadikwe.
Miigwech, thank you, Nia. I'm really excited to be here.
What can you tell us about our panelists tonight?
Yeah, so thank you for introducing me, and I'm going to introduce our two other panelists here tonight. So the first panelist is named Vince Diaz. He is a Carolinian or Pohnpeian and Filipino who was born and raised on Guam, educated in the universities of Hawaii and California, Santa Cruz, and who has been on faculties and departments of Pacific Island Studies, American Indian Studies, American Studies History, and Anthropology at the universities of Guam, Michigan, Illinois, and now at Minnesota Twin Cities, where he is Professor of American Indian and Indigenous Studies and Chair of the Department of American Indian Studies. Diaz is the founder and director of the Native Canoe Program, housed in the Department of American Indian Studies. This program uses traditional, indigenous watercraft and indigenous water-based ecological knowledge and technology from across Oceania and the native Great Lakes and Mississippi River to advance community-engaged research, teaching, and service. He is an interdisciplinary scholar, history, anthropology, cultural studies, comparative and global indigenous studies, who specializes in critical indigenous studies in North America and the Pacific Ocean region. And our second panelist tonight is named Jim Rock. And Jim Rock has taught astronomy, chemistry, and physics for 4 decades in urban, suburban, and reservation communities at high schools and universities. He's recently retired as Director of Indigenous Programming for the Marshall W. Alworth Planetarium and instructor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Rock's goal is to indigenize and digitize the skies. In 2014, he co-authored a text called the Dakota-Lakota Star Map Constellation Guide. He has co-published several journal articles with his wife, Dr. Roxanne Gold, concerning the collaborative restoration and interpretation of Dakota Sacred Mound and cave sites. So now that I've introduced our panelists, I'm going to pass it on to each of them to introduce themselves in their languages and talk about a little bit of the work they do. So first, I'm going to pass on to Vince to introduce himself and talk about the work that he does.
Thank you, Aanakwadikwe. Kasalelia Mainko, Zanhafade, Vicente Diaz, Anpanene Ponpe, Ko Kankausen, Palkalo, Nam Wenkichi. As you know, I'm here at the University of Minnesota now in American Indian Studies, where I run the Native Canoe Program. So basically, we're building canoes with Pacific Islanders and American Indians in the communities. But the work of building canoes from our traditions also includes learning about water, land, sky, knowledge. In most Native communities, you can't talk about land without talking about water, and you can't talk about land and water without talking about the sky, and you can't talk about land, water, sky without talking about people and the past and the future. So in Oceania and in places where water is particularly ubiquitous, these are often embodied quite literally in the craft, the canoe. And so I look forward to sharing more with you. Thank you.
Miigwech, Vince. So I can pass it on to Jim. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hanyete washte mitakiapi. Chante washte na hanna pechi yusapido. Wamdi hanyeto emakiapido. Wacheti shakoing oyate himataha. Imenija ska imachage. Hello, my relatives. The slides advanced a little too fast there. Yeah, let's just keep it on that one. Well, the one after that. Okay, hold on. Okay. So yes, what I said before I explain this slide is that hello, my relatives. From a glad heart, I offer you my hand. That's a traditional Dakota protocol greeting. And when we say hello, relatives, we don't just mean humans. We're referring to all of those who, in our cosmology, our way of thinking, they were all here before us. We humans were the most recent. We need the most help from all those relatives. And so we're in the same canoe, and that canoe voyaging through the stars here is Earth Mother, Maka'ina. And so while we're in this canoe together, we need that balance and respect of each other, and that reciprocity. We help each other, and you know, we don't build fires in the canoe or drill holes in it. And those are important principles as many parts of our relatives today are really struggling. I'm thinking of Hawaii and the fires in Canada, and yeah. So anyway, hello, my relatives. Yeah, as a Dakota from Minnesota, Makoche here. My ate, my dad was a Sisituan. We're the people who were known not just as the Buffalo people, as all Ocheti Shakoing Oyate, the 7 Starfire people, but we particularly were known as enjoying fish. And so I think you'll start to see some connections between my Hunka brother Vince here and myself. And this is Turtle Island, North America. And so all of the 3 of us presenters here, you know, and we recognize that the turtles get wet from that saltwater ocean. Florida is one leg, Baja California is the other. So without going on too much, I'm just saying this is a beautiful opportunity for people to see that sky and earth have always been connected. We've always been astronomers, and that's tens of thousands of years, probably 100,000. We've been learning from each other.
Miigwech, Jim. So I will introduce myself a little bit more. Ninsa Gaagige Aanakwadikwe indigo bejuindu damashkiziming nindun jaba. Nindanoki de misaba kange kinumadi wigumigong jigikinumage an Anishinabema. Minwa Oma Bell Museum Nando Gakinjige wigumigong Nindanoki. I work here at the Bell Museum as the Native American Initiative Specialist, but also in an Ojibwe immersion school, especially creating science and astronomy curriculum for young students entirely in Ojibwe. And I agree with all of the teachings that Vince and Jim both have to share. I have a passion for learning about patterns in the universe, and I think that a knowledge of understanding and seeing patterns in the world is present in all indigenous cultures and within our Anishinaabe language as well. And so I really want to pass that on to future generations and preserve what our elders have to teach us. So I think next we can show a little bit of the work that Vince has done. So Nia, you can go ahead and present the video.
Okay.
To know us properly, you need to know how we got here and how we continue to move through time and space. This is why we still value our canoes, because they connect us to how our ancestors sailed over thousands of miles of ocean, going from island to island without compasses. These abilities and more are held in our stories about stars, our oldest relatives. Stars point us to where we want or need to go, and they teach us how to tell time. We can say that stars steer us in our voyage on this canoe called Earth.
Okay, and beside my lab, and remember this is north, This is the Northern Star. I think I learned about the stars when I was very, very young, maybe in elementary school. Actually, my first travel on a canoe from one island to another island was way back. I don't remember how old I was.
Pafu means to look at and count stars. On a pandanus mat, shells are placed in a circle. The shells represent rising and setting points of select stars around an island or a canoe. And these rising and setting points are useful because they point toward meaningful locations around us.
Tabur came during leaf and time. No more breadfruit. And people were kind of hungry because they just eat taro from the taro patch, no more breadfruit. It's a famine star, and this is designed for famine. Wound means poison. So the fish are eating something that you should watch out for when you go fishing in the month of Woon. At the same time, they said you don't catch a lot of ocean fish in that month of Woon, because even the big fish, they know the smaller fish they eat will be poisonous. So they don't waste time going out fishing. Stars are associating with waves and with the current. We were sailing from Poloat to Tamadam, and then on our way back, we were talking stories, but one of the greatest navigator was with us, and he was sleeping. So he was sleeping, and all of a sudden he wake up and said, "You're going wrong direction." So what? We're not heading for Poloat anymore. And just by feeling it, he was sleeping and he felt the way, his body turned around. But even the way the then make himself turn around, he already knew that the direction is not right.
In the islands, we have a saying, the canoe is the people, and the people is the canoe. How we steer our canoes, for example. Sometimes you can't tell where the human body ends and where the ocean and sky begin. So too with the body of our islands, which begin from the ocean floor and are made up of currents and waves, winds and clouds, and extend all the way up to the stars. Stars that teach us everything. Direction, time, seasons, and how seasons connect us to birds and to fish and to trees, like the breadfruit trees that our canoes are made from. Canoes whose own bodies connect land, water, sky, and people. For the canoe is the people, and the people is the canoe. And I'll make references to the big, the themes and ideas here as we answer the question. So thank you so much.
Miigwech, thank you for sharing that. So now we will move on to Jim talking a little bit about the work that he's done. And then I will do a brief introduction of the work I've done before we move on to our questions for the panelists. So Nia, you can go ahead and bring up the slideshow for Jim to talk about Dakota Star teachings. Okay, Jim, are you ready to share your knowledge?
Yep, sorry, that we are the canoe, as Brother Vince just said, and the earth is the canoe. We are all relatives on this earth mother and within this canoe. So I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures from one of our Lakota language learning curriculum, Tatanka Nawata or Awata. It's the buffalo and the boat, actually. We have a way of crossing the water that is not just the hollowed out tree or the tree with bark, the wata or it's the chanwata, but we have this buffalo bull boat, and it's kind of a bowl shape, and it is covered with buffalo hide. So the idea that it's a buffalo boat implies, well, what if a buffalo were in that boat? Which is kind of, a play on words. So you see the butterfly. So next, and it's good for crossing the little river. And then so you see that we welcome our friends. Oh, you need a ride across? Sure. And so there's a cat and a goose and a dog. And now this red bird. Sure, come on in. I want to cross the river with you. Okay, so the red bird, go ahead, next. And now they see, oh, here's a little larger relative, the shunka, the tashunkwakan, not the dog, but the horse. So come on in. Sure, let's try it. But there's room for all, maybe. Okay, next. And well, I guess, metaphorically speaking, this is then where the earth has to hold us all relatives together. But what's interesting is, if you think about a canoe in the sky, a star canoe, a constellation, how you connect the dots. And what if that canoe appears to go below the horizon? It's like it's going below the water. Well, in this case, the butterfly and the bird and probably that goose, so if you have, wings, it's time to fly back to the star nations, but we do come from the stars, and to the stars we return. We come from the earth, to the earth we return. We're always between sky and earth, and we need each other's gifts. We don't all have the same gifts. So what I've loved is working with our global indigenous brothers and sisters, elders, aunties, uncles, grandmas, and I've learned so much from the Micronesians, and it's been a joy to have Vince and his wife here in Minnesota Makoche and this is where the two rivers join, the Minnesota and the Mississippi. Those aren't our words for those rivers, but where they join here in the Twin Cities is our center of the Dakota universe. And as I said, it's kind of the top center of Turtle Island or North America. So next slide, please. And so I just wanted to say that as we call this the Minnesota Statewide Star Party, that's how you would say it. Minnesota Makoche Akan, Wichanchbi Oyateki. And we're going to also look at the Wichanchbi Omani Izaptan. So I'd like to share a piece about Jupiter, which is the 5th walking star, and as seen from Minnesota. So how our people, the first people of Minnesota Makoche here, look up. And so 19 days ago, if you look carefully, there's a little 4-pointed red marker at 4 in the morning on July 22nd. And you'll see that we have turtle stars. And then to the left of the turtle is a V shape. That's the elk antlers. So we have Kea, Hehaka, and then up above that elk V is actually a plant constellation. That's the tobacco or the chanshasha. So again, our relatives include the plants. They were here on this earth for 1 billion years before we were, creating the atmosphere. They give out the oxygen that we breathe in. So then you see Jupiter is there. Now, to the left of Jupiter is this kind of reddish circle, and it's hard to tell, but in a way, that is the buffalo bull boat that we just saw, that circle. And that is a buffalo in that circle. In fact, it's a bison being born. So those are the Pleiades stars. It says the 7 girls, or that's the head of the bison. And so in a way, that's, well, okay, next slide. I'll let the pictures do the talking. Yep, there we go. So there's Jupiter. And so now you notice 19 days ago, but also at 172 years, back to July 22nd of 1851. Now you see that Jupiter is not by the tobacco stars, but if you look to the lower right, kind of behind that tree, there's a sweat lodge. Again, it's a circular structure. It's almost like the upside down buffalo boat. So next. And if you look to the south, this is the same night, you'll see the Milky Way kind of standing straight in the south. Next. And then to the southwest, just a little to the angle, there's Jupiter. All right, next. And now you'll notice if you go where Jupiter was for us now, there's Saturn back 172 years ago. And 18 days ago in 1851, so that's interesting that Saturn is by the tobacco and the elk, not Jupiter. But again, we're back in 1851. And next. Here we are again now. You see Jupiter by the tobacco and the elk, and that's where I just showed you Saturn was in 1851. Why do I keep bringing this year up? Because in fact, Holly mentioned it in the land acknowledgement. That is the year, unfortunately for us as Dakota Oyate, that 24 million acres of, that's just the southern portion of Minnesota Makoche, was essentially signed away, and we waited another 11 years for those payments. And so that was just, again, a matter of 2 weeks ago, that anniversary. So Jupiter was there in the sky watching that treaty being signed. Next. And so in 8 o'clock in the morning, you see where the sun is. So actually you would not see these star pictures because the sun is there, but we left that image up on the Stellarium program. Next, by noon, or almost noon, you see it's in the south. And then that reddish circle has the buffalo within it, but you'll also notice there's a snake constellation, 16 stars in the snake that's kind of below, or in this case, a little to the left of the buffalo. Next. And then by 7 p.m., again, 18 days ago, but 172 years ago, you'll see the sun is setting in the west, and now you see that sweat lodge. And again, about an hour later, click, there we go. The sweat lodge is behind the tree, and there's Jupiter appearing, okay? So you'll notice that Jupiter was watching as the treaty was being signed. Next. As the sun went down on that, basically a terrible day for us, and losing our wetlands, the places we'd lived for many, many thousands of years, where the wild rice grows, where we hunted, where, you know, it was colonization and contact, and we really had no choice about it. So Jupiter at 9:37 was almost setting. Go ahead, next. 9:42, it's just about down. Next. And 10 p.m., there it is, setting in the southwest. Next. Okay, now August 5th, so that was July 23rd, but 13 days later, August 5th, a bunch of us Dakotas had to sign a second part of that treaty. And the first signing was at a place today you call near St. Peter. It was a place where we could cross the Minnesota Wakpa, the Minnesota River. That's that low crossing place where we had for many thousands of years. And it's about 3 miles north of the town of St. Peter now. But then again, about 13 days later, we had to meet where the rivers join. And so you'll see here, the sun in the sky, very similarly, just 13 days later. Go ahead, next. As the sun is setting, 3 p.m. on the second day of treaty signing, 2 days signing treaties. And the sun sets on this day. Go ahead, next. 5 p.m., 6 p.m., and again. So with the sweat lodge and the sun, there is Jupiter and the moon. Okay, Jupiter and the moon, again, watching that sun. Okay, next. Now, 18 days ago at 3 in the morning, there's Jupiter by the tobacco and the elk. Okay, next. And by 8 p.m., it's setting. And next. And we'll start to see a pattern here. And in 1851, there's Jupiter, but this time with the moon. And they're not exactly close together, but at 8 p.m., Jupiter and Saturn were witnessing, again, the signing of the treaty. Next. And next. And next. We'll speed up a few here. And then again, you saw Saturn was back then where Jupiter is now. Next. And if you got up 3 days ago, or you stayed up till about 11 p.m., you could see the moon and Jupiter were near each other. Okay, and then 5 hours later, so basically 2 days ago, you saw Jupiter and the moon very close together. Just as they were in the sky 151 years ago, they were together and saying, I wonder how those Dakotas are doing in their homeland. Well, the truth is that only 10% of us live here now. 90% of us had to leave because in 1862, Governor Ramsey said all Dakotas must be exiled or killed, forever driven beyond the boundaries of what is now Minnesota. And so that's still the case. 90% of us are beyond this homeland. And so what I'm saying is right here on this slide, 6 years from now, in 2023, Jupiter and Mars will be together. Now, Mars doesn't necessarily have that warlike connotation it does from the old world, but I'm just saying Jupiter will have made 15 times around the sky. It takes almost 12 years for Jupiter to go around. So it's been 14 and a half times around this week. In 6 more years, it will be 15 times around the sky. How long are we going to keep waiting before Dakotas come back to our homeland? And another thing here, point out that Saturn and Jupiter come together closely. The most recent time they got in a conjunction was 2020. And the next time will be about 20 years hence in 2040. What will our Dakota people, will we be back in Minnesota Makoche? Next. So my question is, almost finished here. In 1861, that's 11 years after the treaty, one of our leaders, Taoyate Duta or Little Crow, he could have watched the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter at 4 in the morning with his 15-year-old son. I wonder if he did, because if he did, then that would have been the last time that Dakota land, sadly, just a year later, we'd be exiled from that, where we were seeing the sky from the place of our ancestors. Next. So there he is. And as long as the grass grows and the water flows, as long as the stars and the walking stars shine and dance in circles, they said that this treaty would be honored. Well, it wasn't. And in fact, the treaty was torn up. It was abrogated. Fancy words for you're not only not going to get the money, but we keep the land. Next. And so we're still, he was waiting 10 years after the treaty. And within about a year of that date, we were exiled. Next. Now there's that fish hook. And so as Brother Vince was talking about that star Antares and that time of hunger, and it's interesting because you know about these fires in Maui and in Hawaii right now, and the story of Maui, the islands, how they were pulled up by that one who had that strength. And we have stories like that too, and about generosity and sharing and how we should live together. And but unfortunately, we also were starving together. So here's to good fishing and future connections together.
Oh, miigwech. Thank you, Jim, for sharing all of that. That was wonderful. So we can go quickly and just go through a little bit of the work that I do, but we can keep it pretty brief because I think some of the work that I focus on will actually be addressed in the questions. So Nia, you can just go really quickly through the slides that have my images on them, and I will only take a few minutes to discuss that before we move quickly on to these questions. So my work is mainly through Anishinaabe star knowledge and implementing that into the work that I do in Ojibwe immersion schools. Like I mentioned before, I think that a scientific mindset has been present in our culture for a very long time, and it's evident in the language that we speak with patterns. And so there's very beautiful stories about these patterns that we see in the sky with stars, and through our traditional Ojibwe stories. And you can go to the next slide. These there's words in our language for how the things in the sky move and for certain objects in the sky. So one here is z.umn.edu, or the North Star. We were knowledgeable that everything in the sky rotates around that. You can go to the next slide. And before, one of you mentioned the Pleiades, and we do have a name for that in Anishinaabe Gaagige. There's a lot of traditional teachings about that object in the sky. So you can go to the next slide. So through the work that we do in schools, we're reviving this traditional knowledge to teach to children about using things like using maps and studying the stars at night, and how to connect culture to the work that the learning that they're doing in schools. So this is an example of the integration that I've done with the things that I've learned in Anishinaabe and creating lessons and curriculum in order to teach it to young students so that it can be carried on. You can go to the next slide. And then we use traditional knowledge and words that we've learned about things like how high and low the sun is hanging in the sky. So low is Dabasagujin, high is Oshpagujin, and then creating lessons about it, inquiry-based lessons where students get to use their curiosity in the classroom to understand why. Next slide. And our language is so beautiful and adaptable that there are morphemes present to talk about modern things in astronomy. So that's a lot of the work that I enjoy doing, is being able to integrate traditional teachings and words into new curriculum. This is an example of being able to talk about solids, liquids, and gases in Anishinaabe. And one beautiful example that I'll conclude with is that we have an animal in Anishinaabe called Misquadese, or the painted turtle, which beautifully represents our 13 moon calendar throughout the year, and the moon phases, the full moon phases, which go through each month. And we use this in our curriculum to teach the changes of the season and our calendar year. Miigwech. So next, we're going to move on to addressing the questions. And I will pose the question and then pass it off to each panelist. And we just have to be mindful of time so that we can get through all the questions and also have our concluding statements at the end. So the first question is, what are the intersectionalities of the work? What cultural practices inform the work that you do, and what are the differences? So I will pass it on to Vince first to answer this.
Thank you, Aanakwadikwe. So let me take on the first question of intersectionality, which is a term that's actually used in critical studies in academia to talk about how issues of race, gender, and colonialism, for example, all interconnect in how they affect us. And obviously, the pertinence here is the extent to which indigenous knowledge, beginning with sky knowledge and all that stands for that, has also been erased and marginalized where it still exists by continuing colonial systems, intersecting systems. But one of the things we do in Native studies is to sort of challenge state-of-the-art critical studies frameworks like intersectionality, not dismiss it, but but put it side by side against our critical traditions as well. And I think that one of the things I wanted to say very quickly here is that this theme of astronomy for all, at one level, making it more accessible and open to, for example, indigenous knowledge of the skies and everything that's it stands for, is a good example of that, of the kinds of questions of power that runs through everything we do. But I want to also suggest that the idea of astronomy for all in indigenous language knowledge systems can also be understood in terms of how knowledge about astronomy covers all aspects of the world around us. So to get at the second part of the question, for me, obviously, as a Pacific Islander, being involved in learning about traditional canoe building and water knowledge, which takes us to the sky, where that was the initial impetus. My own investments in academia as an indigenous scholar also has me working with what we often demarcate as an entirely separate space, modern knowledge systems, of which science is the best example. But the point that I wanted to emphasize that we're doing now is actually refusing to see these things as necessarily separated. I don't want to give science and the West a monopoly over systematic observation, experimentation, study, that kind of stuff. And so we want to bring out the native sciences, so to speak, without erasing how science historically has been part of colonialism. So I don't want to collapse native knowledge with colonialism, with science, but I also don't want to give science so much power as if they get to have astronomy and we all get to have only something like astrology. And one of the ways to do that is to also remind us that academia and colonialism are also themselves cultural systems that reflect how they tell stories about the world. So there's the only last thing I want to say is that there's a strategic blurring between the two without losing what's specific about both of them, always in the interest of serving and advancing indigenous people, but in ways that acknowledge that we're relatives with other humans and other than human folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Vince, for sharing that. Jim, I'll restate the question. And so the question is, what are the intersectionalities of the work? What cultural practices inform the work you do? And what are the differences? And we'll have a few minutes to answer this before we have to move on to the next question.
Sure, I can be pretty short. And that is that the sky-earth connection is shown in our teepee poles. The teepee poles lean together, they spiral together, they're twisting and turning, and then they're tied together. And so they make a circle that touches the earth below, and they also point up in a circle to the circle of stars above. And just as your slide showed, that circling around the North Star, there are those stars that are there all year long in that North Circumpolar region. And then there are the stars that change as the course of the year goes on for the 4 seasons, the 2 shortest days, the 2 longest days. Well, all of this is encoded in our teepee. The first 3 poles that point up like that are meant to connect us with 3 stars in what the Westerners know as Orion's belt, or again, what Ojibwe people know as the winter maker, or what my people see as the 3 backbone of the hump of the buffalo, the buffalo backbone hump stars. And so what's awesome is the Earth's equator. If you take Mother Earth and that equator, circular belt, stretch it out to the stars, it goes right through those 3. So by watching what that sky buffalo is doing, you know what our Earth is doing. You know how the seasons are. So there's 7 stars. There's the 3 in the belt, but there's 2 above and 2 below. Well, those are like ribs that connect to the backbone, right? So when we add the other poles in on those, the 3 plus maybe you put 3 between those and 3 between those and 3 between those, or you can put 4, 4, and 4. Either way, you then get this pattern that those are like the bones and the ribs and the legs, let's say, of the buffalo. You cover that teepee in a hide, the buffalo hides that's sewn together. You put the fire in that teepee, and then it breathes because the warm air rises. In other words, we are buffalo people. We come from the buffalo stars, and that teepee lives because the buffalo live, and together, in that relationality or that intersectionality, if we know how to be good relatives, we live that way for thousands of years, sustainably, carefully. And not just in teepees, but we built earth lodges as well, which are more permanent, good for, 30, 40, 60 below zero Fahrenheit. Well, if that relationship is broken, then that's exactly what the colonizer settlers did with the railroads. They killed off the bison because they knew we are buffalo people and we would be starving and desperate. And that's why I'm saying that 1851, those treaties that weren't honored, is so critical for us, because we are now down to 0.01% of our original entire land of Minnesota Makoche. That's just a few acres of the entire state, which in our area went beyond just the boundaries of Minnesota. So it's a critical analysis, just as Brother Vince was saying, that we challenge these Western ways of knowing and defining us. We define ourselves. We are the 7 Starfire people. That's our name, Ocheti Shakoing Oyate. There's the 4 Dakotas, the 2 Nakotas, and the Lakota, 4-2-1 for the north, south, east, west, above, below, and the center. That center point is like the belly button and the navel. And that navel is like the umbilical cord also for the teepee rope. So now you see that as the babies are born from behind me here, that Big Dipper, there's a birth a helper that helps the baby come in to the pregnant mother in the teepee. And she's hanging onto that teepee rope. It's like an umbilical cord to the sky. And so when the baby is born, and we had our first baby born in an earth lodge just a year ago, almost exactly right now, the birthday of that first one, as we rebuilt after 300 years, rebuilt our earth lodges made of these tamarack trees. And it's all based in what I call starchitecture. We're out of time on that today, but you see that this isn't just head knowledge. This is heart. This is living, breathing, sweating, birthing, dying, lived experiential knowledge. And so, but the state of Minnesota didn't want us building those earth lodges. They said, oh no, that goes against Minnesota building code. So we had to get a new state law that said we could ask daddy for permission. If I sound a little spicy, I think you see why. So thank you. We can use big words like intersectionalities, but I'm basically saying, how do we be good relatives and resolve this conflict? I think you understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Jim, before you finish up, we have a request. If you can point to the buffalo on the map behind you before I go on and answer.
Yeah, it's what's within that circle. You're not going to really be able to tell it.
Okay.
It's a symbolic form of a bison being born. And so, it wouldn't really help.
Okay. Miigwech, thank you.
Huh?
All right, so I will answer this question quickly because I want to answer two before we go on to the next question. So this is about intersectionalities, cultural practices that inform me, and differences. So for me, I think our ideas of place-based learning and our ties to Earth and stars is what connects us to different cultures. We each recognize patterns on the Earth and in the stars that are universal. Each of us look in awe at the stars in the universe and notice and recognize patterns, objects, and changes in the sky and on Earth. I think that each of our indigenous cultures has this integrated into our language and our cultural ways of being, but it's tied in a respectful way of living alongside everything with us on Earth. Within other cultures that I've had the privilege of learning about, besides Anishinaabe, I see these respectful views as a protocol for guiding ways of being, and there's a high regard for everything on Earth surrounding each culture's place-based connection. This gets representation within the stars and sky within cultural stories and practices for us. The cultural practices that inform what I do is prioritizing first language speakers' perspective within our Anishinaabe elders and our local communities. And I've also taken the time to participate in ceremonies, deepen my understanding of our language and culture, which our language and culture is tied together. One cannot exist without the other. Anishinaabe is a beautifully descriptive language that's really adaptive too. There's morphemes and descriptors that exist within our language to describe patterns and interactions between objects and beings throughout the universe and within the universe. And I have a passion for learning about and reviving these word parts within our language to both describe new concepts and continually teach traditional concepts. Phenomena in the universe are universal. There are concepts like the way that light rays refract, reflect, and absorb that was observed and understood in our culture. And the proof is the morphemes that exist within our language to describe it. And the knowledge preserved within cultural activities like spearfishing, where it's known that light rays bend in water. And so you have to aim the spear at an angle in order to actually spear that fish. That's one example of many things, but it shows that the knowledge of these phenomena is present and known, and we've always observed and understood patterns in the universe and had questions, which is what being a science and astronomer is. I think what sets Anishinaabe culture apart is the unique cultural teachings that go along with our traditional stories, cultural practices that are really place-based and language tied to place. Each element in teaching is different than other indigenous cultures. You can't really group them together and generalize them. Like our animals, medicines, and origin stories are different than other cultures, and you need to take time, energy, and make gifts and offerings in order to learn those teachings. Me you. So we will move quickly on to our next question. And this one is, tell us about a powerful experience you've had when you interacted at the intersectionality of astronomy and your culture. And also, what are barriers and opportunities the astronomy field can change to be inclusive of astronomers of all cultures and abilities? So I will pass this question on to Jim first.
Yeah, thank you. I loved your answers to Aanakwadikwe. Beautiful. We have, we're all navigating in that canoe. We're paddling from the heart as well as the head. Our ethics and our values, how we act, is more important in a sense than the head knowledge. The head gets us in trouble. And so I guess that's what I'm saying is I've had to listen not just to that Western training, my degrees in astronomy, physics, chemistry, but to what the ancestors, what our relatives in the heart are saying, and have that great mystery, that wasdodia wachimpi. It's a deep curiosity, but it's not a curiosity that wants to tear things apart to see how they work. It asks permission. You give before you receive. You have respect, and so I gotta say that I hadn't planned on knowing. Well, in the cave in downtown St. Paul, there's a cave called Wakantipi. There were these carvings and drawings, and I realized that's our planetarium. Because one of the elders, one of the uncles told me, we come from a star, or we come from a cave, or we've always been here. Those are those three poles, the first three. And I realized it's not an either or, it's an all of the above. And so the star above by the Milky Way matches the cave below by the river. And then there's a cottonwood tree that is the bridge between the water below and the river of stars above. And that Mississippi River there, the Hahawakpa, and then that Wakantipi cave in what is now St. Paul. Above that cave should be 19 burial mounds. all been bulldozed. And even the cave, dynamited by the railroad builder, James J. Hill, whose First National Bank building still blinks the number 1. My goal was to understand that what's on the cave ceiling is now behind me on that sky chart. Those constellations were drawn. We had turtles, salamanders, buffalo, and snake. And so there were 4 snakes, and we're out of time, but basically there is a snake mound about 14 miles to the east of these, the Indian mounds of St. Paul. And the drawings of that snake, the measurements made just before they were also destroyed, gave me all the numbers, as you were saying, of astronomy. We could predict eclipses. In fact, as 2 days early advance. And I can prove that. I've published articles about it. So I'm very grateful for that lived experience. I guess I could say any 60-year-old with 6 years of experience can do that. Wopida, thank you.
Miigwech. Thank you, Jim, for sharing that. So I will move on to Vince, and then I'll repeat the question. Tell us about a powerful experience you've had when you interacted at the intersectionality of astronomy and your culture, and what are barriers and opportunities the astronomy field can change to be inclusive of all astronomers of all cultures and abilities. So Vince.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've had many powerful experiences that have been impactful and transformative, but one is recurring dreams that I've had since I began learning about traditional seafaring, of which knowledge of the sky is really important for directional and seasonal purposes. This is a recurring dream of being out in a canoe and just being lost out in the open ocean. And it's a recurring one. It happens, it's happened about 5 or 6 times now in the past 30 years. And I'm just studying the skies and just getting really frightened. And then suddenly one of the first navigators who took me on as a student appears on the canoe, and he asked me what's wrong, and I said I can't find I don't know where I am. You know, basically out in the open ocean and looking at the stars and can't make it out. And he just looks up and he points with his lips. He goes, right there, you know, and I look up there, and the constellation I'm looking for is glowing, and it just sticks out of all of that. And then it's something that I still get goosebumps when I think about how real and how vivid that whole experience was, and how it really I still look to it as a sign that though he passed away, he's still around. That comes as and B, that the way forward when you're lost is to we have clues to find these things, and the clues are in stories. They come in dreams, and those are very real sources of knowledge that continue to deliver. I should say one last thing, that in all of my transcripts as a decent student, the only F I ever got was in astronomy when I was an undergraduate, and I'm pretty certain that if I take astronomy now, I'd ace it and probably take more classes and probably go on to major in it. But that was by way of learning about how our own ancestors had developed very powerful relationships with the sky.
Thank you, Vince, for sharing that. I definitely agree with the power of dreams as Indigenous people. That's one of our our gifts. And I see that present in our Anishinaabe culture as well. Yeah, so if you're done, I can go ahead and answer too before we move on. So I think a really powerful experience that I have had is related to a constellation that's in the sky for us called Madudu Swan, or Sweat Lodge. And the Sweat Lodge is an important ceremony for us Anishinaabe people. And when you're, I can't share too much, but a powerful thing that happens is when sprinkling medicine on the rocks, they sparkle like stars, and that's your journey through the universe, they say. And then there's a constellation in the sky. We call it Madudu Swan or Sweat Lodge, but it is known as Corona Borealis, or the Northern Crown. And that's an origin story place for us. And being inside of that Sweat Lodge definitely felt like you were traveling through the universe to that place in that constellation. And what's interesting is that the Exploradome that we use here to teach our planetarium shows also looks like a Sweat Lodge. And when you enter in there, you're traveling through the universe. We're using technology to also take that same journey that was in our traditional ceremony. And that was a beautiful connection for me. I'll share another quick experience that I've had, which was working with a first language speaker. We were exploring how to describe solids, liquids, and gases, and how we came to discover those words was remembering when he was a young child walking through the woods in the wintertime with his grandmother, and remembering those beautiful words that his grandmother was using to describe the way that fog was spreading out over a frozen lake, on the surface of that lake. And because that's intrinsically what happens when you're describing the differences between solids, liquids, and gases and molecules, is that intrinsic ability within gases, the molecules just want to spread out to fill that space. And so we use that as a way to describe gas as a scientific process when teaching students, but it was from these words that were very archaic, ones that are deep within the language, that when spoken to each other, speakers would understand it. So just quickly addressing some of the barriers that I think happen. When you're working within Indigenous cultures and languages, there are sacrifices to be made. It takes up a lot of your time and energy in order to make that journey. And there are things that when you are growing up as a BIPOC or Indigenous person that make it harder for you in order to go to school, in order to have opportunities to take things like to go to places like undergraduate or graduate school. And we don't typically fit into the box of what they want astronomers to be. Sometimes we don't have the money or time to study for things like a physics GRE exam because we have all this baggage on our shoulders of reviving our language and culture that was taken from us. So I think that science as a community will benefit from realizing that not every astronomer will fit into this box that they want, that there needs to be flexibility on the ways that astronomy and physics is taught and learned within the community, and that will benefit science as a whole. So next, what's going to happen is we're going to do some Stellarian exploration with Vince before we move on to our ending statements.
Great. Sally, you still there? Or Bell Museum?
We're ready.
Yeah, thank you. So in the video that you watched early on, and the video is available on YouTube, and if you, the organizers can put that link on there. I talked about PAFU. PAFU is this system. Can you show, would you be able to show the graphic, the circle first?
It's in the PowerPoint.
So if just picture a mat with the shells around. So all the shells on the right side of the mat represent constellations that are rising. So if you look at this graphic, everything on the right side are the names in Carolinian and the names that we're more familiar with in the Anglo world. At the top is Polaris, the North Star, and this is set to the 7 degrees latitude where Polawat Atoll in the Central Carolines. It's one of the places that have continued to build long distance voyaging and have preserved the knowledge of the skies, especially for long distance open ocean voyaging. On the right side, 10 is where stars rise in the east, and they all have a matching corresponding location on the left side. Tan means rising and Tolon means setting, and so you'll see everything on the right side. So for example, if you look up Polaris at the very top, the star is called Wenawenafumakit. That means the star that doesn't move. So it doesn't, if you're looking at it, it doesn't rise and set unlike the rest. But if you begin towards the right, you'll see fairly low on the horizon, Mila Penafang and then Wella. These are stars that are in what you're familiar with as the Big Dipper. And then so on and so forth if you work your way towards. So if you look all the way down to the right at what might be 3 o'clock, if this was a clock, you'll see Milap, and Milap is Altair. But then go further, and that's due east. And then as you start looking east towards the south, you'll eventually work your way to the Southern Cross. And the Southern Cross marks 5 different locations from when it begins to rise till it's and it's at a 45-degree angle, and then when it appears to be upright at the southern. So we're close to the equator. You guys won't see from below east down to the south, you won't see a lot of these constellations. You will see Orion's belt, but it'd be pretty high north for you guys, or pretty far south for you guys, and you don't see the Southern Cross. But I wanted to show just, and the other thing I want to say is, if you, in the middle of this circle is an island or a canoe. And so basically these rising and setting points can point you to directions of their counterparts on Earth. If we were on Polawat, for example, and we wanted to sail to Hawaii and then pass Hawaii on to go on to North America, we would basically aim towards the Big Dipper, Tanuela, up there in what looks like 1 o'clock, if this was a clock. So it's a very the other thing I want to say is, other than direction, is all the locations that are represented under this rising star, the Big Dipper, where it rises. When you're in Polawat, all the places in that direction, in the vector in that direction, are known as kin locations. So they're like brother places or sister places and sister peoples under that star. And so these stars also understand the directional points, anything found in that direction as kin. They belong to the same families. I'll just show Sally, if you'll take us to about this time of the year in Polawat, the skies. This is represented obviously in in 2 dimensions and without the curvature. So what are we looking at here? We're looking towards east at the moment, and if you can you swing it towards the Big Dipper, the North Star and the Big Dipper? So if you this helps us because you can see north there. That bright star right under there is actually the North Star, and in Pulawatt, that's actually very low on the horizon, and you'll see at we don't see the Big Dipper at this point, but the Big Dipper will start rising, but we're only going to see that half the year. But they still, even if you can't see it, you'll know where its location is, and everything that you'll find in that direction from the vantage point of where you happen to be located. Again, so navigators will actually know what's under what rising and setting stars from a whole bunch of islands all over the place. And so can you swing over to past east? I wanted to show the constellation that Jim mentioned was the fishhook. Maui's Polynesians call this Maui's fishhook, and you could see it there with the line. This is pretty far southwest rising, and we call this a tumor. And if you continue on towards the south, so tumor there is actually already setting in the west. So if we look south here, we see that's Crooks, right? That's the Big Dipper. Sally, I'm pretty certain. It looks a little different. But if you look up and you see the Southern Cross, which we'll see again also for half the year down because we're near the equator, and you see that cross upright, that will be diametrically opposite to the North Star. And so if you see here's the Southern Cross rising, and at this point right here, a little bit more, it's upright right there. It's a little bit more. That's 45 degrees angle, right? So right up there, stop right there. The Southern Cross is right upright. And that's what it looks like. A lot of you have never seen it up in the northern hemisphere. If you see the Southern Cross like upright like that, and you look and you just turn completely around right on behind you, you'll find the North Star right there. So I just wanted to give you a taste of how constellations. Now you can see at this point the Big Dipper has been rising, and it's the lip or the tip of it always points to the North Star. It kind of rotates around that the North Star, and the Big Dipper. So now it's already beginning to creep into the western skies to set. But that's not where you're going to follow it to go to Hawaii and the North America. You follow where it rose. Anyway, I'll stop there. This will give you just a sense of how stars rising and setting can map the world around you. There's so much more I could share, but I'll just stop.
Thank you, Vince. You good? That was great. I'm very excited about all this discussion. very powerful. So the only thing that we're going to be doing after this is sharing our ending statements, and we can do it each by just conclude anything important that you want to say or add before we end this stream. And also we can focus on what do you think is important about changing the narrative of who an astronomer should be, which is part of the focus of this. So I will pass that question on to Jim first.
Okay, Mitakuyapi. Again, my relatives. The first slide I shared was about how we're all in this canoe, and that canoe is Earth Mother. And then we talked about this project. We didn't talk about it, but Vince living here now, and many others from his Micronesia, the many islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, living right here in Minnesota, Makoche. In fact, not far from our Upper Sioux reservation, Peshuta Zizi reservation. So it is a community called Milan. And so this project, the canoe project that Vince allowed me to be part of, and others from Lower Sioux and Upper Sioux, was that we build canoes together. And we had trees and they need to be hollowed out. So this project was a grant through the University of Minnesota, allowed some of these amazing, you saw in the video, some of these people, and of course their families, some are already living here, to come in and we build canoes together. Then we paddle, sail those canoes down the Minnesota River. And so we learned our languages, we shared our stars. And what's interesting is, even though Vince people at 7 degrees above the equator, 7 degrees above the Orion belt, which is 0, and we're up here at 45 and using these Western numbers. And then the North Star at 90, in a sense, unless you're at the North Pole, the North Star is not over your head. Similarly, unless you're at the South Pole, the Southern Cross wouldn't be over your head. So if you think about polar bears and penguins as relatives, going back to the first slide I shared, who's in the canoe with us, right? If we think that we're all in the canoe together, we won't be ethnocentric. We won't be just Northern Hemisphere or just Southern Hemisphere, because then you realize that Vince's people are Northern Hemisphere as well, but they're in that beautiful kind of, the mid latitudes, and so Hawaii is at 20, and the Maya and the Turtle Island tail there is at central, is at 20. So not only do the stars tell us who we are, so we have constellation identification, but they tell us where we are by their altitude, and so where we are on the Earth, the altazimuth system, rising and setting. They tell us who we are, where we are. They tell us when we are, because that North Star isn't always Polaris. It's a slow wobbling circle, and behind my head is the Thunderbird. And that slow circle the Thunderbird fits perfectly within that circle, is 26,000 years. Now, actually, 26,000 years, if a year is 360 days, it's less than 26,000 years of 365, let's say. That kind of precision is what our people knew. And obviously our relatives in Southern Turtle Island, the Maya people, we see language connections throughout. The stars Vince was just sharing about, the Southern Cross, and there's Alpha and Beta Centauri and near there, those are the eyes of the mama llama. The people in South America they have llama identification the way my people have buffalo identification. And both of us have this umbilical cord connection. So I think it's just beautiful as we with protocol, respect, and generosity, learn from each other. And here's the last point. This Earth needs us to get it together very quickly. Only Indigenous people, I feel at this point, have the heart and the head to motivate us to quit the fighting, quit the denying. we do have fires in the canoe. We are drilling holes. I mean, Vince's people are here because the ocean's rising, because the glaciers are melting. We've seen this before 13,000 years ago, but not this time. This time it's human-made. And we're not hiding from that truth anymore. It must be told, we must work together. So I said, thank you all at the Minnesota Statewide Star Party. Michante Atan Wopiratanka. Remember, you're on Dakota land. Oh.
Thank you, Jim. So I will pass this on to Vince. Any ending statements that you want to say, conclude with, and what do you think is important about changing the narrative of who an astronomer should be?
Yeah, good. So very quickly, what I hope you can take away here is the narrative of astronomy belonging exclusively to only one group of people, and add to that what Jim said, that and what I tried to capture in my video about how the stars hold so much. The stars reflect and refract and represent everything that we know, and so they connect through language and stories and practices, cultural practices, connect land, water, sky, people together. I shared the story of the anxiety of being lost out in the canoe and being righted and shown the way through a dream to find the stars. And it's said that, and this is true, that you could take a navigator who knows the stars and take them and plop them anywhere on the earth, and it'll take them so long as they can see the skies. It'll take them a while to figure out how to get back home, which is to say, it connects where they're from to where they're at. But what I wanted to add is, in almost 10 years of working with Dakota and Ojibwe practitioners around Wata and Wigwasi Jiman, and which also involve putting Ojibwe, Dakota, and Carolinian star knowledge together to accomplish to learn how stars can teach us not only direction but instruction. I've learned that when these are all put together side by side, I use the word juxtapose. When they're all put side by side together, something else happens where we're no longer only reclaiming our knowledge systems for reorienting ourselves to the future and to the world around us, but we're actually building a new kind of indigenous system for the 21st century, where we become literate with each other's knowledge systems, and so I think what we're going to see is that our ancestors actually had a much more familiar, had a kind of literacy with other peoples from other places, and that was through knowledge of the stars. Thanks.
Thank you, Vince Migrich. Yeah, so I will go ahead and do my ending statement. And I really like, Vince, how you touched on that interconnectedness and how we connected with each other, because that's what I also wanted to touch on too, is that there are differences between us, but really what's more important is that all these things connect us. Looking at the stars, understanding these patterns and processes, they connect us, and then we can feel that sense of connection with each other. And so regardless of what culture or language that you're from, we all have that. And one thing that I would like to touch on before we finish up is as we're finishing this talk, I'm really thinking about what really makes somebody an astronomer or a scientist. And it's having an inquiry-based mind and curiosity and having questions. And that has always been present in our cultures. And one thing that's going on with science right now is that we need to have creative minds and different perspectives in order to solve new problems that are going on in the scientific and astronomical fields. And sometimes there's issues with people not being able to come up with an idea to solve a certain problem. But and there's not a lot of diversity inside of the physics astronomy field either. And what we need to do is encourage diverse people, encourage people to keep learning their own languages and their own cultures in order to have that unique mind, everything that makes you unique. Different mindsets will help us solve new problems, and it will be beneficial for science as a whole in order to encourage that. And I encourage everybody to hold on to your own traditional values, whether you're Indigenous or not. We all come from somewhere and we all have our own language that we're speaking. So hold on to that while you walk into the modern world and learn the things that you love, learn the things that you're passionate about. Be sure to keep that piece of yourself, because it will help you while addressing all the new things that you're going to learn about in the world. So meet you. That's all I would like to say. And then we can pass it on and conclude the stream.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank Aanakwadikwe for doing such a wonderful job moderating this powerful conversation about interconnectedness. Also want to thank Vince Diaz and Jim Rock for joining us for such a timely and critical conversation. Thank you to the Bell Museum staff, Holly, Natalie, and Sally, for your support in front and behind the scenes. And for our guests at home, I would like to invite you to join a star party near your neighborhood this Friday and Saturday, coinciding with the peak of the Perseus meteor shower. We can drop a link in the chat to check out a list of events happening this weekend. As you can see, we have something all across the state happening. And finally, I want to thank the WEM Foundation for their continued support of the Bell Museum as Minnesota's astronomy classroom. Thanks, everybody, and see you next year.